him up on the web, you find, yes, we know he has a bookstore, but he really has this great recipe for brisket. So you get to choose between books and brisket, or maybe not choose, combine books and brisket for him. Tonight I'm talking about haute food. A couple of people have asked me, do I have images? And I often do, but in fact, it made me think haute food is really a conceptual term, looking at anything, looking at a dish that one can consider that I would define as haute food, doesn't really tell you anything about it. It's a conceptual category. Haute seems to be everywhere. I was walking down Madison Avenue the other day and I came across a store called Haute Hippie. Some of you have seen it, it's online. And I do have a great cartoon in the book from the New Yorker that has a guy in a sort of diner place, an ordinary schlep guy, and the waiter looks just like him, comes over and says, "Bad news, Sam, we're going haute. You have to take off your cap." Right? So, what is haute? It's a contradiction part of it is contradiction in terms. It is, I think, very much a sign of our times. It speaks to a new culinary relationship, and that means it speaks to a new set of social relationships. Haute food is a culinary phenomenon, but one that draws on and reconfigures the larger cultural context. It cannot be understood apart from that context. Culinary practices always affect more than the production and consumption of food. They are key to the way we live our lives. And I don't think I'm going to have much dissent in this room from that statement. Haute food is modern, not because of any one culinary invention or innovation. It expresses rather an attitude toward food, one that disdains convention, prizes individual creativity. Haute food particularly prizes incongruity, putting things together that don't seem to belong together, or by most lights don't belong together. Or using often unexpected and even unnerving ingredients. This vibrant food culture around haute food has affected the way many of us do food, really whether we know it or not. So then I can talk about how do you get to haute food, and I will talk about strategies of hautification. Notice all this doesn't work in French. It can only be done with the French and English, just as food has no equivalent in French. You have to have a bunch of other synonyms to take care of, alimentation, nourriture, whatever. And so it's a particularly American phenomenon. Take chocolate. Raspberry, nuts, coffee cream centers, those fillings are old hat, unless you go to Mondel's over there on Broadway, which stays true to what it was when it opened in 1943. But you're more likely these days to find wild Tuscan fennel pollen, wasabi, sake, Aboriginal anise. This I got out of advertisements in some of the chocolate shows around. Not your standard assessment. A visit to the chocolate shops around the city, and they are springing up all over the place. And especially the chocolate shows. I heartily recommend the chocolate show, which is in November. It is mind-boggling. Whether or not you eat any of the chocolate is totally mind-boggling. And it's starting in Paris, New York, Beijing, Tokyo, and a host of other cities. You convince the most skeptical that this newly prominent artisanal chocolate bids fair to redefine the world of chocolate. We have entered the land of haute chocolat or haute chocolate. Mixing culinary categories is another strategy. Combining ordinary ingredients combining unusual ingredients with ordinary ingredients. So fancy mixed with plain. A few years ago, New York chef Daniel Boulud made the news by having a hamburger, plain American hamburger, served with fancy French foie gras. And I think he added short ribs in there as well. Talking about wretched excess, but it's mixing the ordinary with the extraordinary. There's, more recently, there's the Korean-Mexican kimchi taco on another thing, or the cronut. The cronut, which was launched in May 2013, turned up in Tokyo within 6 months. It's mixing things, and it's the incongruity and the unexpectedness of mixing that makes this food. Another strategy is to change the venue. Put familiar foods in unfamiliar places. In the summer of 2012, Wendy's in Tokyo, Wendy's fast food presentation, fast food chain, had summer lobster promotions with a lobster imported from Canada. A lobster caviar sandwich, this is Wendy's one. A lobster caviar sandwich, a caviar lobster salad, and an upscale surf and turf with lobster and hamburger. The conventional ingredients, unconventional combined, turn up where they've never been before. It was a summer promotion. It is not on the menu anymore, but it certainly piqued people's interest well beyond Tokyo and beyond the industry rag, the burger news. I read about it in the New York Post. So the incongruity of it was certainly what captured people's imagination. So it was common tabloids, television. You can ask, do hamburger and foie gras go together? Do you really want to muck up your hamburger with foie gras? Do you want to muck up your foie gras with hamburger? For what purpose does it serve? They're a part of a relentless search for the new under conditions of ever intensifying competition. The food world has changed such that we are hard put to identify sometimes a cuisine of reference. So New York chef Jean-Georges Langerichten has reading menus is a wonderful culinary invention. Caviar, Meyer lemon gelée and creme fraiche, or scallop carpaccio with rhubarb, ginger, and olive oil. How do we make sense of the 35-course meal that used to be served at Ferranati's at Louis before he closed it and turned it into a foundation? These highly experimental dishes. Are you even supposed to like them? Adrien himself has said he didn't really care if you like his food. What he's interested in is a new taste adventure. Enjoyment, pleasure, that's not his vocabulary. Are the foraged meals of the Copenhagen chef René Redzepi, now whose restaurant is the #1, has been for a couple of years on the San Pellegrino list. Is this part of the new Nordic cuisine? Is he an outlier, or he and Andre are a new brand of chefs? Welcome to the 21st century world of haute food, where the only certainty is the unexpected. Curious combinations of food undermine long-standing culinary hierarchies. So many challenges to what goes with what, in what order, and in what context. One of my students who just graduated from Columbia last year is now the executive chef in a very good restaurant in New York, Chez Georgette, and he was visiting France, and he went to a restaurant run by an American. He said, well, it was really very, very good, but he had his cheese plate. He started out with a poisse, and he ended up with brioche savon or something like that. I mean, starting out with a poisse goes against the notion of how you create the cheese plate that virtually anyone who knows anything about French cheese has learned. And he wasn't sure if this was by design or because he wasn't trained, but so it's, an American perhaps can get away with it. And indeed, these challenges undermine the very notion of hierarchy. As with Wendy's lobster burger combination or Boulou's burger foie gras, haute food joins contraries, extravagant experimentation with the plain, the ordinary, and the familiar. Competing competitions of production and consumption of food. Playing on incongruities reordering culinary hierarchies but not doing away with them altogether. Haute food discombobulates. Hierarchies of long-standing are no longer taken for granted. So their foie gras and hamburger now turn up in a lot of places. Haute food, though, is more than just another of the nouvelle cuisine that have succeeded one another since the 18th century, which is when the term first appears, 1748, I think. It is not a repertory of dishes. It is not the work of any one individual, although some people talk about it a great deal. Unlike haute cuisine, it cannot be taught. It is not a system. Haute food is a perspective that prizes the new, keeps tradition at a distance, prolongs, makes cooking exploration, and the chef as a combo artist, scientist, impresario. Haute food focuses on the astonishing accomplishment of the individual dish, in contrast to haute cuisine or Mexican or Vietnamese cuisine or whatever, which generally refers to an identifiable culinary system, more or less coherent. Valuing singular achievement over the collective enterprise, haute cuisine destabilizes. It favors the mouthful over the meal. And one of my arguments is that it really undermines, all the attention on the singular food, undermines the collective construction that is a meal. Choice is extraordinarily important. It's one manifestation of the increasing visibility of production. Once carefully kept out of sight, backstage in the world of fine dining, the Ancien Regime or hotels and so forth. A classic example. Text, of course, is George Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London, where you go from the inferno of the kitchen, and then this marvelous waiter goes out, sails into the kitchen, into the dining room with an entirely different attitude. They are literally two different worlds. And Orwell, you can see Orwell's book as Anthony Bourdain 30 years, 40 years before, revealing the underbelly, the other side of cooking. Cooking becomes part of the spectacle of dining. Traditionally relegated to a completely separate kitchen. More and more chefs today put themselves more and more to the fore with ostentatiously idiosyncratic creations. When you have a tasting menu at Jean-Georges, it says Jean-Georges' tasting menu of X, or so Jean-Georges' career in his tasting menu. The show reveals the secrets of a once closed world, where the door between kitchen and dining room, as Orwell said, separated two worlds. Today, cooking is part of the meal. Special tables may be set up in the kitchen to bring guests even closer to the production. I interviewed Gilbert Lepose of the Belladonna 22 years ago. He said he was the one who first thought of having a table in the kitchen. I don't check, but that's what he thought. So that's about the time when sort of kitchens in that sense started opening up. Then there are all those television shows that are about backstage. And as Iron Chef, it's not exactly backstage, but the focus is on the intensity of the kitchen. The sportscaster giving you is she going to put not going to go in there, or it's going to be sweet bread, whatever. So this height is quite extraordinary. It brings the kitchen backstage to the front. Then there, Gordon Ramsay is another one. Emerald Lagasse, let's bump it up a notch. Is that what it is, isn't it? Kick it up a notch. Emerald kicks. So this drama of production is what appeals to the spectators. And one of my colleagues had a 5-year-old daughter, and all these cooking shows were her favorite thing. 5-year-old. Luxury is also extraordinarily important in understanding this. These phenomena are rooted in the prominence of luxury, not just luxury around, but luxury in everyday life. Haute food constitutes itself a modern luxury. Research, of course, is important. It in any domain, and it always costs a bunch, whether you're in sociology or neurobiology or in the kitchen. But financial considerations are only part of the story. In distinction, his inquiry into ways that taste reaffirms and shapes the social order, the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu defines luxury in terms of choice unfettered by necessity. That's obviously an ideal situation, that's his definition. Rare products and equipment. Just reading Williams' Sonoma drives one to I mean, there's so many things, especially in the New York kitchen, you don't have space for even half the things that they have in the catalog. Sheer investment of time for training, the hours required for constant invention and incessant promotion. All of these features of oat food make the whole enterprise enormously expensive. The push for experimentation is a function of the abundance of products and a cadre of trained personnel, and they both cost a lot. Choice is crucial because oat food, just like gastronomy at the beginning of the 19th century, cannot flourish under economic, medical, or ideological constraints, whether material, financial, or ethical in nature. Constraints, indeed all obligations, work to curb choice. Oat food really proposes an idea of liberty. It's a utopia of culinary freedom to cook and to consume without regard for others. It's pushing to the extreme. That's what the ideal type really leads you to. Choice was vital to gastronomy, the development of gastronomy in early 19th century Paris. It was the choice offered by the fixed menu that made the restaurant the exemplary modern institution that it remains today, a modern and urban institution. Gastronomy as a social practice, like the judgment of the critic, assumes discernment, in which in turn supposes the comparison made possible by choice. You can't make a judgment unless you have something to compare with beyond saying, this is good or I like this. Choice is always involved. But oat food addresses a different world, the overstimulated world of the 21st century, one in which the familiar often bores, and culinary boredom is something that chefs and consumers flee like the plague. Neophilia reigns. Individuals seek actively to extend their taste horizons. Competitive dining, that's certainly the case in the world. Competitive dining continually raises the stakes. But the problem is, of course, is that the extraordinary easily becomes ordinary. And humdrum. Chefs and consumers alike work against the culinary order. The greater the sophistication of cook and consumer, the greater the fear of the mundane. Oat food pushes us to ever new taste territory. It pushes us out of our comfort zone. Sometimes we want to be in our comfort zone. That is another choice that we make. The advantage, of course, of the familiar is that it's the basis for judgment repetition allows. Only many, many tastings put the consumer in a position to pronounce judgment. Understanding oat food is not simply a question of leaning on an established, identifiable cuisine. There's the familiar dilemma of an encounter with an unfamiliar cuisine. The best example I have is the French culinary critics in, I think it was sometime in the 1970s, that impressed me greatly. Christian Go and Henri Millot, and in their Go and Millot guide, they encountered Japanese cuisine, and they hadn't a clue, not a clue, how to talk about it. He said, well, the only thing I can say, it's not that it's good, it's astonishing. And that's where, now, since then, they, not around anymore, they and we have learned to appreciate and to understand Japanese cuisine. In other words, we learn the principles, some of the principles and practices that made Japanese cuisine accessible. But haute food won't work for haute food because learning a culinary system is not possible because there is no culinary system. The emphasis you put on individual genius, creativity, innovation means it cannot, it very much works against replicating anything. Choice, of course, has consequences. The dynamics of culinary individualism work both for and against the chef, the cook, and indeed the consumer. Contemporary consumers, and I'm sure all of you have had this experience, whether at home or as guests or in a restaurant, insist upon their idiosyncratic preferences. And I'm not just talking about allergies. I have my allergies and all my allergies, but I'm talking about or culturally mandated interdictions. I'm talking about I don't do gluten, I do vegan, I do free range, ethical, free range, organic, humanely raised, locally sourced. Requirements are infinite. One of my neighbors said it was very hard to have a dinner because his wife worked on animals and to invite her colleagues, everybody that was working on something that they might serve. And they're vegetarian because it's the only way they can have a communal table. And all of these take priority over the collective the notion of the meal. You are here having a meal, and then you are creating a community, a culinary community, if you like, and you don't create it by each one going his and her own way. Chefs, too, of course, have their own agenda, which is one reason for the proliferation of tasting menus. The chef's choices curtail your choices, and sometimes they don't give you choices. Where does culinary authority lie? And also, what about those freebies you get at restaurants? You know, the young ladies that come by, are they free? No such thing as a free lunch. In a more sophisticated analysis, the French anthropologist Marcel Mauss, in his book on the gift, talks about the reciprocal obligations created by gifts. Try to refuse the chocolate. I was once I'd taken some friends to Guy Savoy in Paris, and I somehow ended up talking, and he served an extra dish of lentils. Now, I am allergic to lentils, but I was not about to send that lentil dish back in the kitchen. So my friends were pressed into, it was already a big deal, into heroic overeating so that we could send back at least a dish that at least had meaning. So that was exactly, it took me 10 years to figure that out, but I was under an obligation for that gift. Every meal, in fact, negotiates the two. The rejection of convention affects the setting as well as the food. The elegant settings of haute cuisine match the extraordinary dishes. Today, this connection is much, much weaker. Partly, of course, again, a question of expense. The opulence, at one point in time, the opulence of haute cuisine engaged or inspired diners to dress up and act in such a way as to live up to the cuisine. Today, the pervasive informalization of American society, particularly since the 1960s, means that consumers no longer dress up to the food. Rather, it is the restaurants often that dress down. Smart casual, which is the title of what we see published. Smart casual is the order of the 21st century. Dress codes are less and less strong. Upscale restaurants do provide jackets for gentlemen who are sartorially challenged. But I asked, actually it was a little bit on that, I asked, well, what if the guy doesn't wear it? Well, we'll drape it over the back of the chair. The modern food world, therefore, gives us the possibility of choice, but also the obligation of choice. We have to choose. I was reading on somebody's blog that we we make some 250 food choices a day. I don't know if I can get all out. One figure which I don't like to say, so I do that. Obviously breaking it down very clearly. You are making those choices. You need this, not that. Every day we seek to reconcile culinary individualism that licenses us to follow our appetite, eat what you want, with the conception of food as a means to a collective good, that is the meal. Well, so what? What then does oat food add to our understanding of what it means to cook and consume in contemporary society? Now, food is oat. There are plenty of diners around that haven't changed very much. But first of all, it raises our culinary consciousness, and I, for one, think that's a good thing. We are aware, we talk about, we think about, we articulate our relationship to food, and that, I think, can only lead to greater quality of food and greater sensitivity to the significance of food in our lives. The food talk that is everywhere makes it almost impossible to escape the social as well as personal implications of our food choices. By expanding the options for producers and consumers, oat food modifies the dynamics of production and consumption. The most momentous transformation is the relationship between convention and tradition. The culinary universe of haute cuisine, with its rules, its techniques, its ethos of elegance and luxury, was notable for the congruence between content and culinary content. The codified repertoire of dishes, the content in which these dishes were served, shaped expectation. As for production and presentation, think of the extravagant centerpieces, ornate table settings, the rare decor, the sumptuous sauces, and complex dishes called. These all called for and long received a similar demonstration of the extraordinary distance from the ordinary. Thorstein Veblen did not talk about food in the theory of the leisure class in 1899. But late 19th century elites in America and elsewhere really did wonderful examples for decor and decorum went together. Those fans of Downton Abbey take note. You see that, and that's part of this world, the formality of the world, which seems so strange. It's that congruence is important. The once tight, therefore, connection between style of life and style of consumption has been broken. The intrusion of production, the open kitchen, the celebrity chef, intrusion of production and consumption undermines the separation. Culinary adventures occur more and more outside traditional settings. How many people frequent food trucks? Food trucks which move all over the place. Some food trucks have extraordinary reputation, they're on social media and so on. The informalization of dining that means the culinary categories are crossed and recrossed with the Latin. Sushi in the U.S. today has little to do with the context that makes sushi in Japan. Pizza in Naples is not pizza in New York. It's not pizza in New York, as Bill de Blasio found out when he tried to make pizza with a knife and fork. It was certainly un-New York. Frozen quiche in my upstate supermarket is not the quiche that came from France. And the American hot dog is not the French dough. And so on. We assimilate foods into our own context. Of course, these cross-fertilizations are not new. They occur whenever foods and people move about. But the internationalization and the globalization of the 20th century increased the choices available. Oat food as a model of the relationship between cuisine production and gastronomy consumption has, however, reoriented the food world. The challenges that oat food poses to traditions and conventions could be construed, and they often are construed, as democratizations. This, I think, is a very rosy picture. Availability does not mean accessibility, and there's a lot of work on what are the characteristics, social and economic characteristics that allow access to what is in fact available. The widespread availability of best, most interesting, extraordinary food, yes, a lot of us benefit, but of course, a lot of people do not. On the other hand, people create their own tastescapes. They may not live in the world of oat food for a long time, but they will. And I was reading on Yelp the other day a write-in by, you're two 20-year-olds and you can hardly scrape two pennies together, and we went to Per Se, not inexpensive. He said it was worth it. Now they're not going to go to Per Se again for I don't know how many years if they ever go, but it's a possibility of choice, and their tastescape has changed accordingly. On the other hand, oat food is indeed only story. Tradition and convention have not disappeared. Redefined somewhat at best. I think nice. Brisket is probably not oat brisket, and we wouldn't want it to be oat brisket. If you're going to have an avant-garde, you need an arrière-garde to define yourself. That means extreme cuisine, what I call extreme cuisine, needs ordinary cooking. Oat food needs both everyday food and oat cuisine. Adventurous cuisine has to have hierarchies to jumble, traditions to reject. It's this tension that makes the food world today so exciting, but also often so perplexing. Conclusion, this brave new food world brings us together. It's a utopia. I used the term before, and I'll do it again. And I was checking a reference the other day, and I came across a phrase that just about perfectly sums up the underlying principle of this utopia. Pompier, who was a French journalist, marked a lot to she was a journalist. Her husband was very active in the right-wing French newspaper in the early 20th century called L'Action Française. She also wrote for the journal. Anyway, she had a collection of recipes called The Good Dishes of France, which she published in 1913. And she gives us a recipe, as it were, for, she gives lots of recipes, but then she gives us the real recipe. Those who cook, those who eat, those who talk about food, she tells us, have to have the sense of joy in reality. And I submit to you that that phrase is what brings us here together as well, and it succeeds.